John Locke and Jean Jacques Rousseau. John Locke? Jean Jacques Rousseau? Hitler? What's the connection between... What about the connection between Locke, Churchill, and Roosevelt?
What is this place? Where am I?
Hi, it's Rory, and you're watching Pardon My Youth, News Talk with Rory Who. And today, we're diving deep into Enlightenment philosopher history and connections that may surprise you. Locke and Rousseau both heavily influenced the creation of democratic governments with their social contracts. Yet, concluding his chapter on Rousseau in his History of Western Philosophy, Russell seems determined to drive a wrench between them once again, stating that the social contract's first fruits in practice were the reign of Robespierre.
The dictatorships of Russia and Germany, especially the latter, are in part an outcome of Rousseau's teaching.
Russell believed that Rousseau's legacy was limited to Robespierre's reign of terror and World War II fascism, leaving his philosophy reviled and its future bleak. However, even in his errant analysis of Robespierre and Hitler, he neglected one key figure, Immanuel Kant. It is a commonly told story that Kant missed his famously punctual afternoon walk solely because he was caught up reading Rousseau's Treatise on Education, Emile. Regardless of this anecdote's truth, Rousseau's influence on Kant remains clear. The latter lauded the former as having an
uncommon acuity of the mind and a noble impetus of genius.
Kant's central idea of the categorical imperative, in fact, stems from Rousseau's general will, a deepened and radicalized iteration of Rousseau's theory. It emphasizes the universalization of one's will and the adherence to such will as law. In this way, Kant is an outcome of Rousseau. Both believed that freedom was obtained through obeying volitional laws, and Kant's construction of the categorical imperative followed as a result. Kant eventually formed his own opinions on politics and the Enlightenment, but Rousseau's definition of general will molded Kant's perspective on freedom. Kant was not the only one to espouse Rousseau's virtues. In his dedication to Jean Jacques Rousseau, Robespierre calls Rousseau divine, promising to remain constantly faithful to the inspirations I found in your texts. In fact, figures in the French Revolution from all sides claimed to follow Rousseau's general will. Even King Louis XVI himself pledged to defend and maintain constitutional liberty, whose principles the general will, in accord with my own, has sanctioned. The general will was flaunted by all as a means of legitimacy, and Robespierre was no exception. However, Robespierre in his fervor believed that anyone who opposed the general will had to be eliminated, spurring the frenzy of executions he enacted during the Reign of Terror. Robespierre's enemies soon came to include anyone whose entire being was not committed to championing the Republic.
FYI, both of you are on my enemy list.
Yet his perception of the general will was inherently flawed. Robespierre and his followers emphasized the idea of one will over the general will, claiming that their minority spoke for the will of all citizens. In his social contract, however, Rousseau explicitly notes that the basis of government is often wrongly conflated with the sovereign whose minister it is.
Excellent.
Robespierre made that critical blunder of conflating the sovereign, or the general will of the citizens, with his own minority government. During the Terror, he established an emergency government and not the general will, falsely conflating sovereignty with the government. Although Robespierre claimed to be inspired by Rousseau, his role in the Terror stemmed from his own naivete and fanaticism, not from his admiration of Rousseau's teachings. Hitler, unlike Kant or Robespierre, was much more a distortion of Rousseau than an outcome. Their clearest tie seems to be through the Romantic movement, which Rousseau pioneered, a reaction against dispassionate Enlightenment logic. Romanticism saw industrial forward progress as detrimental to human culture, emphasizing emotionally nostalgic narratives of heroism, nature, and the past instead. Nationalism drew on Romantic themes by promoting a shared cultural history, nurturing a deep sense of pride in a national identity. Extreme nationalism was a common characteristic of fascist movements. In fascist countries, national identity was the foundation of individual identity. However, fascist leaders such as Hitler fundamentally distorted Rousseau's initial desires. Although the conception of national identity may have borne a passing resemblance to the general will, the purported similarities were merely a facade behind which fascism lurked. Rousseau had a humanitarian objective at heart. Like Locke, he sought to fulfill the needs of the individual above all else. He prioritized freedom even through his idea of the general will. Hitler, on the other hand, exploited the will of the people for an authoritarian purpose and completely ignored individual needs. From engineering a phony Polish attack on a German radio station, to combining propaganda with terror to intimidate those who did not comply, Hitler and the Nazi regime failed to uphold any sort of Rousseauan obligation. Rousseau states in his social contract that
the general will considers only the common interest, while the will of all takes private interest into account and is no more than a sum of particular wills.
In Hitler's case, there was only one will masquerading as the general one: his own. With policies such as the Enabling Act 1933, which allowed the Chancellor to enact laws without the permission of the Reichstag or the President, Hitler took sole control over the government to fulfill his personal goal of purifying the Aryan race. Central to Rousseau's social contract was the separation of suffrage and government. In Nazi Germany, both were Hitler. So, in summary, Kant used Rousseau's idea of the general will to create his concept of the categorical imperative, but diverged from his teacher's beliefs because of his own personal ideology.
Humankind is capable of moral freedom.
Robespierre followed Rousseau's social contract to enact revolution, but misinterpreted Rousseau's ideas in his zealotry and ended up creating terror instead.
The will of the revolutionary government is general will, and shall be imposed through violence.
Although both of these figures were inspired by Rousseau, they ended up taking drastically different directions in their lives because of their own internal characteristics. With Hitler, Rousseau's philosophy was simply a mask to justify his own totalitarian and racist ambitions.
My will would be masked as general will, by inciting the irrational emotions such as extreme nationalism.
Rousseau did not create fascism. He simply laid out a framework that Hitler projected his own iniquity onto. Enlightenment philosophers were not alchemists. They cannot change a person's inner nature through their ideas. American colonists used Locke's theories on private property to justify their seizure of indigenous land. But it was not Locke who imbued them with their lack of morality in doing so.
Sorry, Locke says no farms, no ownership.
I literally did not say that.
Too late, John, we screenshot it.
Kant and Robespierre both read Rousseau's work, but it was they themselves who chose their separate paths, however influenced they may have been by Rousseau's writings. No alchemy transformed Hitler either. Rousseau's philosophy was distinguished, but it did not have the power to cause Hitler's own authoritarian tendencies to arise.
Did it work? Are you transformed?
Nope.
Rousseau may have been the father of Romanticism, but he, just as Locke to Roosevelt, was no father of Hitler.
My teaching is a lake. What you take in reflects what's within.
Desperate to condemn the horrors of World War II in its immediate aftermath, people were quick to castigate anything remotely associated with fascist regimes. Rousseau fell among the censured. A trend formed among historians of the time. Isaiah Berlin labeled Rousseau
the most sinister and most formidable enemy of liberty in the whole history of modern thought,
while Jacob Tallman claimed that
Rousseau's general will became the driving force of totalitarian democracy.
Rousseau and Locke, however similar their intentions, were wrested apart. Following Berlin and Tallman, Russell deemed Rousseau Hitler's predecessor and associated Locke with Churchill and Roosevelt simply because they were Allied leaders. After removing this World War II lens, however, Russell's assertions lose their weight. Roosevelt and Churchill owed their governments to Locke, but never directly followed his philosophy. While Hitler may have seemed to emulate Rousseau, he in fact fundamentally departed from the philosopher's ideas and twisted them for his own gain. Rousseau was not a harbinger of depravity, nor Locke a herald of salvation. Despite how history has attempted to color their legacies, two philosophers were merely human, writing books that they could only hope might someday change the world.